welcome back to another amazing episode. I am so honored and excited today to be joined with Renee Baribeau. We have been planning this interview for so long, and I'm so excited for it to finally come forward. So welcome to the show, Renee.
I'm really excited to be here with you. I love the color of your top. It's really pretty.
Oh, thank you. I got this earlier last summer. We were doing a photo shoot for the company, and I got a new dress for it. And so now it just has really special memories attached to it.
Got the good juju and it goes
Exactly.
along.
It's got all
Right.
the good vibes, and I feel very professional and spiritual when I wear it. So I thought it would be perfect for today's conversation.
That's interesting. When I was when my book Winds of Spirit came out, I did a photo shoot and I had a cape made, and it's still one of my favorite things to wear.
That's
You see it
beautiful.
a lot in a lot of my promo photos from back then.
I love moments like that where we get to kind of tie something in the physical world to this experience that we've had, and then it comes back every time we use it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I spent quite a few hours reading your amazing book, Winds of Spirit. And there's so many beautiful insights in there. And of course, you wrote the book for a reason. So all of that information is there. But I'm really curious if we could use that as a jumping off point for today, because there's so much wisdom to be found in the wind. So maybe we can take that and see where it takes us.
I love that. The sometimes when I reread some of the book, I'm there like, who wrote this? Like, I really think that it was wind inspired, and the wind did most of the sculpting like it does on a dirt field out your window. But it 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 still inspires me to go back and read it because it doesn't feel like they're my words. It feels like they're words of the wind more than words of Renee.
That's beautiful. And there are so many different ways in the book that you describe what the wind is and the different ways that it can present itself. But I'm curious if you could give us, now that you've had so much time after writing it and releasing the book to the world, when someone asks you, well, what is wind to you? What's your answer?
For me, wind is the force that moves absolutely everything in creation. And if you look at any of the creation stories, the wind is there. And if you think back to what we can imagine is the beginning of creation, something stirred. And that something that's stirring is the wind. And fast forward, a few billion years when people started to navigate the landscape as hunters and gatherers. They communicated with the wind to get the information about when to change locations, where to hunt, where to how to name a child, naming ceremonies. All of that was fostered by the wind, and therefore people in Africa had a different wind relationship than the people at the Arctic or the people in the Dakotas. They all had a relationship, but depending on where they lived and the community which they were communicating with, it came out in very different ways.
That's beautiful. And so in your waking life, we were talking before we hit record about shamanism and Reiki and all of the amazing ways that spirit moves us. How do you find the wind showing up for you in your personal practice?
Well, let's get to Reiki first, because I think so. Reiki is like the doorway that so many people walk in through for energy.
Mm.
It used to be touch healing, and now it seems to be, Reiki is the buzzword. And a long time ago, a Reiki master, because that was probably one of the first things, somebody gave me, in a Reiki initiation. And I don't think they call it that, but, and it was like my doorway into, oh, this is energy. This is how energy moves. This is symbols of energy. And it just seemed such an accessible way. But she also told me that when she journeyed to Asamoto, is that his name?
Yeah.
That he said it never intended it to be its own system, that it was always intended to be, used in conjunction with other things. And so for me, when the first time I crawled into an inipi on my hands and knees, I felt like, well, this is home. This is this is how I can express myself to spirit in this darkened womb, with hot coals in the middle, hot rocks in the middle. And there was it related more to me to, maybe that's why I'm the practical shaman. It related more to me to like the practical nature of how community crawls into, a darkened chamber and connects with spirit, with each other. And so when the wind work came out, I thought I was writing a book for my coaching clients, truthfully. And the wind started to speak to me one day on the bluff. And I was thinking, well, what a great metaphor for things, wind, Mary Poppins blew in on a east wind and left on a west wind, and all of these wind metaphors that you could find through your wind down. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. Well, then one day I was with a client, and a shamanic client, and she said, well, why don't we start calling up some of those wind spirits? And that's when the work started to change, when I went direct to these wind spirits for more of a direct experience, and realized, well, this isn't a metaphor. This is an ancient shamanic practice that's been lost in the caves of time.
I love what you were saying about that, using Reiki as an entry point, because I think that's something that I see a lot with our own students and clients, is it really is this beautiful access point where people start to dive deeper. And I love that you had an experience with a teacher who knew that Reiki wasn't originally meant to be a standalone. That's something that I feel like we don't get as much in today's Reiki trainings, is it was really just, it was a part of the pathway to enlightenment, is what they would have termed it, because it was rooted in those Buddhist traditions. But I love the ways that we can find those connections between Reiki leading into shamanic practices, leading into working with nature, and how it, I almost see it as like this funnel that brings us deeper into nature and deeper into connection with ourselves. And how I think we all have those moments, whether they're on a grand scale that inspire us to write a book, or if they're just like personal moments of revelation where spirit leads us through those doorways, and then we have that aha moment of, well, what if I just called in the wind and worked
Mm.
with that and invited it in, and then it sparks something amazing. So did you know at the time when the wind started working with you where it would lead you?
I had no clue. And even still, my editors are like, your next book doesn't have to be about the wind. And I'm thinking, like, but everything's about the wind. When you really get down to it, it's just like one of the things lately I've been on this mission because, you know, um, I have a podcast with Sandra Ingerman, and it's it's a humbling experience because she's been teaching for 40 years and has multitudes of thousands of students, and they're like they're Sandra Shaman, Sandra Shaman, and they like Renee, whatever this wind stuff is, and they don't they don't relate to the winds of shamanism, the wind work as being shamanic. And I'm teaching for the College of Psychic Studies this spring in the UK, and she goes, yeah, I think we need to add shamanic wind, not shamanic wind work. And I'm there like, wow, like just that little psychic shift in somebody else saying it made me think like, yeah, people don't think that I'm a shaman, even though I go by the practical shaman. I'm doing, wind work, and that's not shamanic. I've had like students who finish after 2 years of a program saying, yeah, I'm going to go take some shamanism now. And I'm thinking like, all right, you go do that. What do you think we've been doing? And any program is just about really revealing your own shadows and your own other side so that you can have that more direct connection with spirit. But recently I'm on this thing to let people know that the wind work is really shamanism in its own ancient, most primal form of energy movement.
I love that. I love that idea of wind as a reflection of energy movement, because that's really all it is. And I know that you work with coaching clients too. And I love the balance there, because one of the things that I love to bring up in sessions is, when a client is experiencing a really difficult emotion or something really heavy, and they have to go through that energetic process of releasing it. We cry, we burp, we sneeze, we cough, we scream, we yell, all of these things. And I always relate it back to, it's like how the earth has weather patterns where it
Mhm.
releases energy through the rain and the hurricanes and the thunder. And we have to do that too as people. And I love the awareness that you're bringing of wind work as shamanic, because I feel like the more that I explore shamanism and the different ways that it's perceived across the world, it almost feels like, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but it almost feels like there's two different ways of viewing shamanism. There's kind of the group of people who see shamanism as connecting with your power animal and your spirit guide and really journeying in non-ordinary reality, and more of that spiritual side of shamanism. And then there's the side of shamanism where we're connecting with nature and we're feeling the energy of the tree or the wind as it's taking us, and we're tuning into the energetic patterns that are underlying things in our physical reality, almost like the nature of nature, if you will. And I find it so interesting, these two different sects of shamanism, because you'd think, it's a shamanic practice. This has happened for thousands of years, and yet we still have these different ways of viewing the practice as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because there's the direct revelation from going to a power animal, getting a direct revelation. I don't know if there's been a hierarchy of like information or something, like, as opposed to if you go to Peru and one of the Pacos, the that's what they call themselves, is like, that's my mountain, that's my mount, that's your mountain over there, you know what I mean, like that there's this relationship. And so when the idea of you going out to get information, or that you're taking a walk and the information comes because you're out with the mountain and you're out with the wind and you're out with the nature. I've been actually, it's been a question on my mind because I'm working on the book The Practical Shaman, and like for me it's got to be way more practical because not everyone's going to sit down, take out their drum, and tap away and journey to source it. But does that mean that they're not getting good information or that inspiration that's outside of themselves? And so I think that there is, if you talk about shamanism and there's changing, moving from one reality to another to get information, whether it's through trance or journeying or dancing or singing, or for me, playing the wind whistle, that they're all respectable. But just as we've classified our religions and we've become to a monotheistic religious, there's one God, and my God's right, your God's wrong. And I see that a lot happening in the nature-based communities, is that this is ours. No, it's not yours. It was on the wind for 4 billion years. And because you needed that information when you were living up here, you got that information. Whereas the people maybe in Australia got different information because that's what their community needed to survive. It's way more practical.
Yeah. And I think that idea of moving towards how we all have this tendency, this desire as people to have those labels and this structure to, this is where shamanism ends and something else begins, or this is the
Mhm.
religion. And I think was it New Zealand who just declared shamanism as a religion? And I saw that and was just thinking, but it's not, because it's a coming into communion and connection with nature, and recognizing, like you said, that there's not one thing or one area of knowledge or wisdom that is ours. It's just part of that continual flow. We're just part of the greater whole. And that awareness, I think, is a shift that I'm really hoping, people like you who are working with the wind and working with that idea will start to bring that awareness into the spiritual community, because I think it's an area of our awareness that's maybe not as developed as it could be. I think we're still holding on to that idea of these labels of this is shamanism and this is not, or I have to do, I have to meet my power animal this way, otherwise it wasn't a direct revelation. Whereas when we can step into that space of just being part of the cycles and part of that movement and part of a greater whole, and recognizing that we're almost just like a cog in clockwork, if we're just part
Mhm,
of how energy's moving. I think that's such a beautiful way to facilitate healing.
mhm. Have you watched, uh, The Queens?
No, I haven't.
It's on Hulu. And if you really think that we're so smart and so, so advanced, this is it's like a National Geographic on the women animals in the kingdom. And I was watching it and thinking to myself, like, well, you just want to know, well, how do they know that there's just so much food in this territory and it's time to kick out, one of the pack, so the pack is going to survive? Or how do they know that, this is the cub eater, and, that you got to protect your young from that. And so the thing is it's like, it's this whole experience about like, how do they know, and it's nature. It's just like nature is there to tell us absolutely everything we need to know and how to survive on this planet Earth. And it's us who moved from that experience in relationship with nature and thought like, no, no, we have language, we can be smarter than this, and we're going to build communities, and we're going to build skyscrapers, and we're going to build, plantations or whatever it was that made us have power over. And it's not working anymore. And so to get back to these more, and I don't even want to call them indigenous, because indigenous classifies it into a place, but to go back to the wind, which is really a direct source of energy and energy movement, and really like deer know to change direction when the wind is blowing. When's the last time, I mean, did you change direction when the wind was blowing? I mean, maybe if you don't want the soot in your eyes, but we don't have that fine sense of nature. And so we look out at, what's going on out there, the storms and stuff, and we like judge them. But the truth of the matter is we're the ones who built the communities too tight together, so that when the fire comes through and takes it all out, we blame the fire, instead of, why do we take all of those ticky-tacky houses and congest them into a small space, and now we're going to be mad at the fire because the fire knows to clean out the debris so that new seeds can grow and new plant can survive. I mean, we're just the thing that's out of sync with nature, not the nature.
Yes. Yes. And I was talking with a group of our students today, and they're in a module of their coursework where we actually are focusing on the direction of the east and the energy of air and wind, which I love the synchronicity of talking with you today when we had this conversation. But we were talking about that idea of how our external reality is a reflection of our internal energy. And we were talking about, well, if all of that's true and external reality is because of an internal energetic blueprint, then what's nature a reflection of? Nature is then a reflection of the divine, of spirit, of source, of whatever you want to call it, but of that inherent life force energy. And so, therefore, nature itself, that tree outside, that blade of grass, that bird, is inherently going to be so close to the divine and have so much wisdom to offer. So, like the female lions knowing when to release someone from the tribe, or I was thinking even just watching my cat and how he knows when it's time to go sit in the patch of sunlight. And just the inherent wisdom, or ducks. I love watching ducks after they get in a fight and then they shake themselves off and they float on their way because they know that they just have to release that energy. And I think nature has such a beautiful way of, because it is just that reflection of life, of the divine. And so it's going to express itself that way. And when we look at, how we've built our lives, something that I love that you talk about in the book is how we've built ourselves into boxes. We
Mhm.
drive in a box, we live in a box, we have all of these boxes that we put ourselves in. And if you look at nature, there are very few places where a box shape exists. Trees are round and leaves are curved, and there's so much illusion to flow and being flexible and having that ability to just move with life that I think we've taken out of our day-to-day reality as humans in the modern world.
Absolutely. And the thing is it's so tenuous at the moment. I mean, if you think of like all of the natural disasters happening here and there, and that these boxes we built are really pretty much on some pretty shaky foundation at the very least. And yet I had this experience where I had my idea that my security was in a house that I owned, right? And all of a sudden, something happened this winter that took me and shook me to my core, and I realized, like, oh, I think this is safe. I think that this is where my safety lives. And I realized these artificial constraints that we build around ourselves, like the jobs, the houses, the cars, are they could all be, they could all be shaken like leaves from the tree in a matter of one strong windstorm. And I had to turn it all back into my innerverse, my inner wisdom, my inner knowing. Like, how am I going to how do I navigate my inner east wind, or how do I navigate my inner south wind, or my inner west wind, or my inner north wind? And is that in harmony with what's going on in the exterior world? And it may or may
Love
not
that
be.
idea of an inner verse. That's amazing.
Thanks. I'm working. That's a chapter of my new book, is
I
about your
love that.
navigating your innerverse.
That's beautiful. So, can you
Um,
tell us a little bit more about those different, for if someone hasn't read your book and they're hearing this conversation and hearing us talk about the different winds, they might feel a little lost. So, can you tell us
okay.
a little bit about each direction of wind and what those are in our practice?
Sure. So like you and like so many other people, I've studied many disciplines. In fact, I do a Vedic meditation every week because I believe, as most truly spiritual believe, that it's all the same. And the view from the top is the same, but different. And some of us want to climb the mountain with, rocks. Some of us want a nice, easy slope up the hill. And we all navigate very differently. But that the real truth is about, cleaning house to be of service. Essentially, I think that that's our job here, is our role is to, how can we be of service to each other, to our survival on the planet. And so, being that I had studied so many different traditions, that when I was writing the book, Winds of Spirit, here, let's just show it in case you haven't seen it or you're curious. I needed the awakening compass, as I call it. And so I spent months with the living room having, a big compass in the middle of the floor. And I went through all of the traditions that I had studied and a few I had never studied. And I put everything that they said about the east wind and the east. I put everything that they said about the south, the west, and the north. And what was really clear was not everyone thought the same things about each direction. There was a lot of similarities. Like, in every tradition, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The cold north wind and the south wind have always been in opposition to each other, as opposed to the other are on more of a, cooperating continuum. They're more oppositional. And but what was really clear was that these four cardinal points, the east, the south, the west, and the north, have been on the radar for humanity since before we were speaking. They were, if you go back to the Lascaux caves and you go back to some of the, earlier cave drawings and line drawings that they're finding, there was always these directional pointers. And one thing we know from sailors is that sailors navigate from their own wheelhouses. I can't navigate from your boat, and you can't navigate my boat. We have to navigate from the central core of how we are, hence the idea of this Innerverse. But these other, so if you go to one school and they say this is what's going on in the East, and I say this what's going, it doesn't really matter, because if you're navigating from your own wheelhouse, then your sun is going to rise wherever it does in your world, and it's going to set wherever it does in your world as well. But that then I was so I'm there like, okay, well, we're talking about winds. Which winds am I going to? I mean, this was a lot of it was heady. What winds are we going to use? Well, I couldn't say the Roman winds. I just couldn't say it. And I'm there like, oh, people are really going to struggle with this. So I went to the Greek winds. I thought I just went to the Greek winds because I could say them. But what I realized later is that it was the Greeks who started to conceptualize all of this earlier, information that we were receiving directly from nature. It was the Greeks who started to, really think about logic and how that all went. So I realized that that was probably a good reason to, delineate the Greek words. But then what surprised me was that I found 150 or more wind spirits from around the world. And that's where it really got interesting, because I started to realize, like, for example, like, just open to one, see what it says. Oh, I got no wind. When oh my God, there's that no wind. How would they know that at the equators no wind blows? There's these bands along the equator where no wind blows. But like Yangdong Homlang from Jeju was about balance, and Jagoda from Poland was about compassion. That these winds had different archetypes, different characteristics, and I can only believe it's because it's what the people who were speaking the same language back then needed.
Mm.
So I just charted them all. Once I had the master scale of this is your compass. Well, these other winds could be blowing at any given time in your life. And then, but it could be like, so say, for example, you had this isn't confusing, that you have Dakotas in the south. Or so if Dakotas in the south, that you need to have compassion for your own needs and desires. If Dakota, this is, remember, compassion. If it's in the West, then you have to, maybe you're having a foot problem and you have to have compassion for your ability to not finish projects or not be able to do something physically. And then in the North, it's about the spiritual. So do you have compassion as a principle that leads your life? And if it's in the East, it's new beginnings and ideas and memories. Again, I charted all of this, and that's what, this goes into. But, what are your beliefs around the idea of compassion? Do you only have compassion when it fits into your mind and your beliefs, or can you have compassion when it goes against what you believe? And, which I think is a good lesson for what's going on in the world now, is like, do you have compassion for the person across the table who doesn't believe as you believe politically? And if you don't, that's fine, but it's your life that's out of balance, not mine. Mm. If I can be in my own inner spin and, see everything as, just a reflection of my own wheelhouse, my own experience, then I can either be in Trader Joe's in, aggravation that the person in front of me is like putting their groceries out slow, or I could be perfectly in principle saying, oh, well, they don't move as fast as I do. And our conditioning is always going depending on what inner winds are blowing, as well as, where we are in our own cycle of experience.
And I think we
That
can
makes sense.
that makes total sense. And I love the map that you just kind of gave us, because that's everything that your book goes into, is looking at what are these different winds and how do you learn to use them in your own life, and which spirits are at play for you, and what are they telling you about what needs to happen. And I love how clearly throughout the book you lay everything out, because I think, like you were saying, those of us who have studied multiple modalities, I think we do come back to this understanding that at the end of the day, they're just different frameworks that we've been given to help us understand ourselves, understand our role in the world, understand how we heal. And it was what we needed at the time. And so I love using the wind and the wind spirits because it does give you, like you said, there were more than 150 wind spirits from
Mhm.
around the world. And so it gives you, for anything that you're experiencing, it gives you this spirit, this archetype that you can connect to and you can call on, that can give you, like we were saying at the beginning, we all have that desire to put a label on something or to put a container on something. And so when we have a direct spirit that we can call on, it satiates that desire that our mind has to have something to pinpoint it on. But then it also gives us this opportunity to then engage with that energy, because I think we all have, whether it's through Reiki or shamanism or breathwork or whatever it is, I think we all have that experience of feeling energy move through us and how similar it feels. This is something I was struck by when I was reading your book, is that idea of how similar those moments when we feel energy moving through us feels to actually feeling wind on our physical body. And we can feel that momentum and feel that change. And so when we can engage with that, and then we have this conscious tool that we can use of knowing, okay, which direction is it coming from, metaphorically or literally? Which spirit is this going to work in conjunction with? And how can I bring that energy into my life? It just gives us this really tangible tool for working with the inherent momentum that energy has throughout our lives.
Mhm. And to classify it, like, the idea that I can call to, Vayu for strength, or Mari when I'm lost, instead of, like, traveling out to the universe to see, which animal wants to meet me. It makes me more empowered to say, Mari, 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 I'm lost, come. And the wind will come and help you. And I find that, like what I first started to see when I started to teach it was that people's lives just started to change once they put a little wind in their sails. And they knew that they could, twist the sail a little bit if they wanted to go to a different shore, but that it was wind powered. It doesn't mean things aren't going to happen. Like, I had a really tough situation at the beginning of the year, but the wind stepped in to meet me at every turn that I had to tack to get through the situation. And sometimes I think that's the best we can do, is like, it doesn't mean you're not going to get diseases. It's not going to mean that people aren't going to die in your life. It means that there's a force bigger than, more powerful than you, that can help you move through those experiences. Or you could sit there, like when the doldrums, where there's no wind, for as long as you want, but knowing that there is going to be an momentum, there is going to be a spirit, there is going to be some source of movement that comes in and shifts you from that place.
Mhm. And I love it as a teaching tool as well, because I think one of the questions that I get asked very often when people start their spiritual journey is, we start thinking about that idea of being aligned with the divine, or aligned with our soul, or aligned with whatever it is that we're aligning to on our spiritual journey. But there's always this idea of this inherent understanding that we have, that there's a flow to life, there's a direction to all of this. And if we align ourselves with it, if we kind of pinpoint ourselves in the right direction, then we can flow along with it. And there's that question of, well, that's a great understanding, but how do I do that? And I love the concepts that you put in that book, because they really give you a framework of, here's how you work with the wind, here's how you align yourself with it, here's how you keep yourself, just like a sailor in a sailboat, here's how you keep your sails working with the wind and using them to further that momentum and to stay on the right path. And I think that's a really beautiful gift of clarity that you can give people in the midst of that journey when the wind can feel so tumultuous, I think.
Absolutely, because the winds are going to blow. They really are. Hold on to your hat. They're going to blow more and more and more. You're very wise for a young woman. Where did you get this wisdom that you possess?
Oh, thank you. That's a lovely question. I think, I don't know. I think I kind of came into this lifetime with it this time around.
your students are lucky because, you're like, you're vibrant and alive, and you've got really a great deep insight. And that's just a nice thing to see. It's refreshing.
Oh, thank you so much. Truly, it's an honor to hear those words from you. I truly appreciate it.
But yeah, there's not, it's really quite simple. I would suggest that everyone picks up this book, because I think it's like the Book of Ruins, or, it's going to be on the bookshelves long after, hopefully there'll be bookshelves long after I'm here. But, that it's one of those pearls of wisdom that it's just, I'm honored that I was listening. And that's a really important question, because, the late Hank Wesselman, when he started to read my book, he called me, he goes, "No, the winds came to see me." I go, "Yeah, too bad you weren't listening that day." He goes, "Yeah, somebody came." And he goes, "Didn't you read it in my book?" And I'm there like, "Oh, no, I didn't read that book." And he's there like, and so there was this whole mini chapter about this mini paragraph about how this woman came up to him, and after a lecture, and said, "Hey, the north wind's in the back of the room, wants to speak to you." And, he got it just enough to put a paragraph in the book. And I'm there like, thank goodness you weren't listening, because you might have written this book first. And that's what's really fascinating about spirit. It's like, are you listening, and are you going to do something when spirit speaks to you? Because if not, spirit's going to move on to the next person who's going to listen, who's going to, take, put pen to paper and write out those words, because it's been moving around the planet for 4 billion years. The fact that it came out 6 years ago when I heard it was because, or 10 years ago when I started listening, was that every single time in history that there's been a tumultuous time, the fall of the Roman Empire, when nuclear war came, nuclear power came in, all of these different times, we were tossed into turmoil. And what's our spiritual lifeline? I think this time the wind has a really important hand in how we can move through it, because it's accessible to everyone. You can go outside, you can feel the wind kiss your cheek, and then you can, move in harmony with your soul's calling.
Hmm. I was reminded while you were speaking earlier, and again just now, of the idea of in shamanic traditions, we have those vision quests, or the Hanblashayapi, I think is what they call it in the Lakota tradition, of crying out for a vision or calling to spirit to work with you. And I love the alignment in that with what you were talking about, with calling on the wind spirits, or aligning yourself with what your soul is speaking to you, because it's calling out to the divine, calling out to the wind, calling out to life to blow through you and to show you the way. And I think that's a beautiful visual.
It's great. And you just remind me, I spent time on the mountain, and I sat there crying for a vision for 2 or 3 days, and nothing, crickets. I was very thirsty. And, because the vision doesn't necessarily, this is the human element. The vision doesn't necessarily come in the way that we want it, or the way that we, think we deserve it. It comes in the way that spirit wants to deliver it. And so, I got my period when I was on day 3, and I was torn apart, because I wasn't supposed to be holding the chanupa while I was bleeding, and I probably wasn't supposed to be in the ceremony while I was bleeding. So I decided, in my best thinking, that I was going to leave. So I left everything there, and I started to walk down the mountain. So when they came looking for me, I wasn't there. I think they were quite concerned, but I got lost. And I traveled maybe 8 or 9 miles out of my way. And you have to remember, I hadn't drank water or had any food in several days. And I found myself in front of a spigot. And this, there was spirit speaking to me with the spigot, because I had never experienced reverence before in my life. And here I was in reverence to the water. And it wasn't like you think I would like opened up the faucet and put my, mouth under it but it was that I took a little bit on my handkerchief and, wet my lips. And it was just this reminder for me, it was like, when I was walking up there, the medicine man said, "So have you ever seen a bear?" And I was like, all the time I'm thinking like, oh, I'm going to see a bear, And again, he was preparing me for another time in my life when I was somewhere else doing a ceremony. I looked up and there was a bear standing there. And but I had 10 years, 15 years to think about this bear, I guess. And so it didn't scare me. I said, "Thank the bear for coming. You can go now." And I went back to the ceremony I was doing. And so we think of these little packets of spirituality, but really it's a bigger, longer continuum, that might be this life, 2 lives, 3 lives, 100 lives, we don't know. And so I feel like that with the wind. The wind is that kind of expansive, it's been traveling around the planet for 4 billion years. Think of all of the information that it has. And it travels around the world in a few short, a week. So it's getting a little information from you, a little information from me. It is the warehouse of all the information, and that's powerful.
Absolutely. And that idea of, like you were saying, that vision or that wind, it doesn't always come the way that we think it should or the way that we want to. And I think that's where, again, going back to connecting with nature helps us move out of that space because, the trees don't worry about if it's supposed to rain that day or if it's supposed to be
Mhm.
sunny. They were called the standing beings in a lot of native traditions. They just existed. They just were. And the same thing with the winds. If it's not a question of is this where the wind is supposed to be going, it just is where it is and it's going
Mhm.
and it's going to take what it needs and leave what it doesn't. And I love that idea of being able to navigate life in a more almost in a more gentle way when we let go of those restrictions and those boxes that we've made that we think things should fit into, and we just let that wind blow in our lives. So I'm curious as we come to a wrapping up point on today's episode, I'm curious if you have obviously reading your amazing book, but if someone were to come to you and say, I can feel the wind calling to me, I'm ready to work with it in my life. What do I do first? What would you tell them?
Well, let me play the wind whistle so that they can even remember what the wind sounds like.
Please.
Let me know if you can hear it. Okay. So I'm going to invite everyone to close their eyes and just check in to see if you remember this call. Ah. So if you hear that call and you feel that call, my first suggestion would be to, order the book Winds of Spirit and really just dive in. Take yourself for a wind walk. Go to the door. Go outside. Ask the wind a question. Simple. Start with simple questions. And then wait until you feel the wind kissing you on your cheek. And then just walk. Put away your questions, put away everything, and just walk and see what changes, see what shifts, see what information's there, see how you want to experience that walk. And I'm preparing to walk the El Camino, so I've been taking a lot more wind walks lately, and you know, it, it tells me something different every single day, and it's just as simple as like notice how the day's a little bit longer, Renee, that you can walk a little bit later. See, we want to make it these big, complicated answers, but it's like, no, you can get a little more done because you can take a little walk later when it's not so hot. I mean, if we start to live in harmony with nature, we're just coming out now. It's spring. We've been hibernating. So it's like, what seeds am I going to plant for the summer? And if you're in Australia, what seeds am I going to take from, what seeds am I going to harvest and put in the silo so that, or food so that I can get through the long winter and start to live more in harmony with nature because the wind will get you doing that.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today, Renee. And I think if someone wanted to connect with you, how would they do that?
You can go, there's a couple of places. Thepracticalshaman.com is my main website, and from there you can go over to windwork.org. And I also have a private Facebook group called the Wind Clan on Facebook. And also every other week, Sandra and I drop a new The Shaman's Cave show. And we're just like two old friends who sit there and talk over tea, what's going on and how we see the world. And so it's not as formal as some podcasts, but we have a grand old time.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It has been an honor to talk with you, and hopefully we'll have you on very soon.
That'd be great. So thank you so much, and thank you to all the people listening now and later.
Mm-hmm.